Are we being prepared for a false flag ET takeover? The following article discusses developments in holographic technology in the context of false flag events and manipulation of the public. All the more important to keep this in mind in light of recent images of UFOs buzzing U.S. warships and a renewed push by intelligence agencies to control the UFO narrative. Be afraid. Be very afraid. That, apparently, is how the powers that be have wanted us to react to a continuous series of deceptive, false flag events perpetrated on the public for many years. According to Professor Lance deHaven-Smith, author of Conspiracy Theory in America, the term false flag describes covert operations that are designed to deceive in such a way that activities appear as though they are being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who actually planned and executed them. React to a continuous series of deceptive, false flag events perpetrated on the public for many years. According to Professor, contemporary events that can be labeled as false flag include the 1933 Reichstag fire in Berlin that was blamed by the Nazis on the communists, the proposed, but never executed, 1962 Operation Northwoods plot by the U.S. Department of Defense for a war with Cuba involved scenarios such as fabricating the hijacking or shooting down of passenger and military planes and the sinking a U.S. ship in the vicinity of Cuba, too, and more recently, the events of September 11, 2001. It now appears we face the imminent danger of a bogus invasion by extraterrestrials. Advances in technology allow for such a scenario to seem authentic. So say a number of experts in fields as varied as physics and politics. In this brief exposé, we will explore what those experts are telling us. Dr. Stephen Greer's latest findings a year ago, in the March-April 2016 issue of New Dawn. I reported on a talk given on the 21st of November 2015, in Washington, D.C., by Dr. Stephen Greer on how the secret government works, UFOs and the deep national security state. Almost exactly 1 year later, Dr. Greer gave another lecture in Las Vegas, Nevada, entitled, The Cosmic False Flag, in which he expanded his message to include information on how covert interests have been laying the foundation for a false flag alien threat and a potential militaristic takeover of the Earth. Since shortly after World War II.3, he detailed reports received from credible, inside sources that, beginning as early as the 1940s, technologies have been developed under paramilitary unacknowledged special access projects, USAPs, to stage false alien abductions, animal mutilations, and seemingly real UFO encounters to plant seeds of fear in order to condition and prepare the world for the coming hoax of an alien threat. The purpose of such a threat is to make it possible to establish a much-talked-about New World Order, NWO. This is exactly what Dr. Werner von Braun told his assistant, Dr. Carol Rosin, before he died. He predicted that after 1. The threat of communism during the Cold War, there would be 2. A manufactured threat of global terrorism from rogue nations of concern. Then, 3. Threat of a world catastrophe from an asteroid impact, and after that, 4. The staged enactment of a takeover by ETs. Von Braun was personally familiar with the secret technologies the West obtained from Nazis who were taken from Germany to the US as part of Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II. Developed much further since that time, these technologies include anti-gravity vehicles, electromagnetic field systems that can materialize objects by trans-dimensional means, and various psychotronic weapons that affect human consciousness. Greer mentions in his recent talk the perfection of holographic systems that appear very, very real. He says these systems are in the hands of true psychopaths in the covert programs. The military-industrial gangbangster global complex of fascists who are desperate to have WW3 be interplanetary. Digital Tricks and Project Bluebeam in addition to Dr. Greer. There are numerous others who have been conveying similar warnings. William Arkin in the 1st of February 1999. Edition of the Washington Post talked about voice morphing technology developed at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. He mentions what he calls tricks of the digital age, employed as special effects in Hollywood, like Tom Hanks appearing to shake hands with U.S. President Kennedy in the movie Forrest Gump. Used by the military, such techniques can become PSYOPs, psychological operations, seeking to exploit human vulnerabilities. For instance, projected holographic images were proposed but not used to simulate the appearance of Allah floating in the sky over Baghdad in 1990 during the First Gulf War. Most recently, Mike Adams of Natural News in a 12 February 2017 article cites a number of UFO experts who are warning about what might be the most bizarre event in human history. A cosmic false flag, where desperate governments of the world stage a massive fake alien invasion to finally complete their goal of ensuring total human obedience under a never-ending, "the aliens are coming," false flag hysteria. He refers us not only to the work of Stephen Greer, but includes a link to a video from author-activist Mark Dice who talks about Project Bluebeam, which uses what's called the radio frequency hearing effect to beam and modulate non-directional voices into plus inner ears. 7 Dice reminds us that in the 1980s US President Ronald Reagan suggested before the United Nations General Assembly that perhaps we needed an alien invasion to bring the world together. New Dawn's interview with Norio Hayakawa. In a New Dawn interview a few years ago with ufologist Norio Hayakawa, he echoed the belief of Dr. Jacques Vallée that the UFO phenomenon is real but cautions us that we cannot assume it has to do with extraterrestrial visitations. Hayakawa went on to suggest that it could even be a momentary, holographic intrusion from some form of parallel intelligence, some form of time slip, interdimensional accident. We just do not have the answer at the present time, he said. Hayakawa adds, the late Canadian investigative journalist Serge Monast was the first to come up with the allegation, in 1993, that NASA will develop this Project Bluebeam technology. HARP, which began to be talked about in the early 1990s, was basically another version of Project Bluebeam, utilizing some of the Tesla technologies. If there really exists a global cabal whose long-term plan is to enforce a global government, the most logical way to carry out this plan would be to create an absolutely convincing need for such an authority. Hayakawa mentioned the work being done at Los Alamos, Sandia, White Sands, and Dulce, all in New Mexico. He also reminded us of the related work of famous conspiracy theorist William Bill Cooper, and of the claims of Robert Bob Lazar, who says he took part in a top-secret government project at Nevada's Area 51 to reverse engineer recovered ET spacecraft. It is interesting to note that Hayakawa and others point to military projects to create holographic projectors for psychological warfare as the probable method used to create the Arizona Lights on the 13th of March 1997. An Independence Day scenario. Christopher L. Ruby, who calls himself a holistic visionary and runs the HeartCom network and radio show, has a page on his website that addresses many ramifications of Project Bluebeam. 10. He takes a religious bent in predicting one of the goals of the fake alien takeover will be to discredit organized religions in favor of a one-world faith, thereby causing further religious wars on our planet, wiping out a large segment of the population. He points to media attempts to condition us to both fear ETs and submit to their takeover programs, such as the Sci-Fi Channel's 2002 Steven Spielberg 10-episode miniseries Taken, the 2002 M. Night Shyamalan science fiction thriller starring Mel Gibson about crop circles called Signs, the Star Trek and Star Wars series, and even the Stanley Kubrick film 2001, A Space Odyssey. While there are many more flicks I've not mentioned, perhaps the most obvious and glaring example of while such movies as Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977, and E.T., 1982, as well as the recent highly acclaimed Arrival stress peaceful communication with aliens, they can be contrasted with early films like The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951, and War of the Worlds, 1953, as well as the more recent Alien series of sci-fi horror movies, all of which scared the heck out of this writer, especially at a young age. While there are many more flicks I've not mentioned, perhaps the most obvious and glaring example of impending alien invasion is the movie Independence Day, 1996, starring Will Smith. In short, it's becoming increasingly clear we've been conditioned to be afraid of extraterrestrials over a very long period of time. On his website, Christopher Ruby gives details about existing technology that can cause earthquakes at specific points on the planet and that can erupt volcanoes. He also describes how it's now possible to produce gigantic space shows with 3D optical holograms and sounds projected from satellites onto what's called the sodium layer about 60 miles above Earth's surface. The sodium layer refers to a layer within the Earth's mesosphere of unbound, non-ionized atoms of sodium that comes from the ablation of meteors. Advances in mind control techniques. From an audio perspective, we know that a combination of electromagnetic radiation and hypnosis has been the subject of research since the 1970s. Ruby quotes a researcher named G.F. Shapitz who said back in 1974 that, "The spoken words of the hypnotist may also be converted by electromagnetic energy directly to the subconscious part of the human brain without employing any mechanical device for receiving or transcoding the message, and without the person exposed to such influence having a chance to control the information input consciously." This possibly indicates that many of the mass shootings we have seen in recent decades are the result of such influence on what can be referred to as Manchurian candidates. Believe it is safe to say those poor unfortunates can be presumed guinea pigs for testing these deplorable weapons. While we know the Soviets experimented a great deal with that kind of weaponry, it would be a mistake to think the Western powers, as well as China, have not also perfected and exploited such telepathic instruments. In January 1991, the University of Arizona hosted a conference entitled the NATO Advanced Research Workshop on Current and Emergent Phenomena and Biomolecular Systems, at which attendees were warned about the potential abuse of their research findings. In fact, we now know there is equipment in operation at the CIA and the FBI that treats the human brain and neuromuscular systems with ultra-low frequency radiation pulses. Perhaps it's possible to make the blind see, the deaf hear, and the lame walk. But we may never know.